important. So this is a summary of what supply chain means, and I would like to invite Sam from the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply to talk about his experiences during his vast experience. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Where did you get that picture? Good afternoon, everyone.
So, Sam, can you briefly introduce yourself? Just, I don't think everyone knows the CIPS, as we call it. Maybe you can introduce yourself and CIPS as well.
Sure, yeah, happy to. My name's Sam Achampong, so I represent CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. So we're the global institute that represents the profession of procurement and supply. We work across the world, and also we work on a B2B basis and a B2C basis with practitioners who are procurement or supply chain practitioners, of which I am one as well. So thanks for inviting me to this IT-flavored session, which is not the usual forum I'm on, but it's great.
Honored to have you. So the first question, Sam, is, I mean, I assume you had so many interactions with so many different types of customers as well in different industries. What do you define, as Gartner calls it, the collaborative digital ecosystem, which might be, you know, an unknown term to the rest of the audience? How do you see it in practice?
Yeah, it's interesting. Gartner have a lot of tags that they put on things, don't they? And look, an ecosystem is something where a number of stakeholders can collaborate effectively. So a digital ecosystem obviously is one where you're maximizing technology to encourage that. So if you're talking about it in supply chain or procurement terms, it's maximizing the technology that can be used to collaborate with all your stakeholders internally and externally. But what could that mean in practice? It's unsurprisingly, there's so many organizations who still would issue an RFP or a tender or float a tender. I love it when I hear that term, float a tender. So when all these organizations issue a request for quotation, that's still very paper-based. It's still very receive the envelope, open it, that sort of scenario. But clearly there are, and there have been for many, many years, systems around where you can get rid of all of those elements of administration or paper administration in your pursuit of a supplier. But also, not only that, all the way down supply chains, getting real-time information from suppliers, getting more suppliers to participate in your competitive tender exercise. All of these tools are already out there, primarily through the cloud and other base systems. So where you have all your stakeholders, your internal stakeholders, maybe finance and procurement, your suppliers, your manufacturers, all being able to interact effectively using the technology available. That's the ecosystem that you're talking about.
Thank you very much, Sam. So the second question is, you've seen and helped many companies, I mean, different industries. What do you see as typical trends for this, to establish this collaborative digital ecosystem? I guess you can't do everything at the same time, right?
Yeah, you can't. And look, there's definitions of what, you know, do we still call it Industry 4.0 tech? But anyway, digitalization technology, there's different definitions of what these are. But in research that we've done, we found out that maybe 95% of organizations that we know have adopted at least one digital technology. So that's from cloud, AI, augmented reality, you know, maybe not blockchain, let's forget about blockchain for a second, but maybe 3D printing. So 95% of organizations have adopted at least one of these, one Industry 4.0 tech within procurement and supply chain. And 30% of those organizations, if they've only chosen one or have only implemented one, it's cloud computing. So clearly, cloud is the adopted technology within procurement and supply chain to establish that ecosystem. There's a caveat to that. We did this research before COVID. Okay, so you can imagine that the adoption is exponential now. It's probably not just 30%. So it's huge. So, I mean, what you'll find is that what are organizations looking to achieve and why are they adopting technology? First of all, they should do. It's obvious. It's there. There's no reason why they shouldn't adopt the technology. But essentially, the main drivers are operational efficiency, productivity, whether it's employee productivity or general productivity, and also reduction of operational costs. So those are the main drivers for why people are adopting technology. And that excludes the people who I think we've mentioned in some of the presentations where somebody says, okay, I know this company have got SAP or Oracle or whatever, therefore I'm going to get it as well. Okay, that's a different thing altogether. These are where organizations actually want to achieve those three things that I mentioned, and therefore realize that digitalization or a digital transformation can help them to achieve that. So that's what the trend is. People who want to achieve those three outcomes mainly. There are other outcomes as well, but those are the three main outcomes.
Thank you very much. And I guess in those trends, integration becomes very complicated. I mean, if you have to integrate to your ecosystem and to devices and utilize AI or blockchain technology, making sure that it's more auditable and proving where a certain, I think JB mentioned it already, what is the origination of a certain product, where has it been made, which resources have been used, that becomes very complicated from an integration point of view, I would assume.
It can, and I think you're straying onto blockchain technology, where source of origin and maintaining data accuracy come into it. But that's very, very important. I think it was said by one of the other presenters earlier that, look, I'm a procurement and supply chain guy, so I don't have any axe to grind in terms of wanting digital transformation per se. Okay, so if an Excel spreadsheet gave me the same outcome, then Excel spreadsheet it is. I'm not doing digital transformation for the sake of it. It has to have tangible results. So I think what you're saying is, have you got an ecosystem? Is it integrated? I'm not really thinking about that. I'm expecting it to be integrated anyway. The reality is it's not always integrated. But as all these technologies come together, and they increasingly are, then it's beginning to make more and more business sense. Because I think, as it was said before, I think by Ashley, why would someone go out and say, I need an ERP? That's a tag. You want a business outcome, and for business users, I want a business outcome. I would want a more effective way to approach suppliers. I would want a more effective way to achieve the lowest total cost of ownership. So therefore, I want a wider pool of suppliers to be able to attract and engage with. Technology helps me do that because it takes away borders. So that's the solution, right? But I'm not necessarily going to do it per se. But as we see now, technology largely has the tools to enable us to do that. We had a bring your kids to school day at our office the other day, and one of my team brought their 12-year-old kid in, and he sat in on our team meeting, and we're talking about usual stuff, boring stuff that people who are not maybe millennials or even Gen Z or Gen Zers talk about. And he sat through the meeting, very polite, looked as if he was engaged. And I had a one-to-one meeting with him afterwards. Okay, the kid's 13, and we spoke about things he wants to do, etc. And I said, do you have any questions from our meeting earlier on? And he said, yeah, just one question. He said, you guys spoke a lot about invoices. And he said, what are invoices? Okay. So of course I was, only a kid, so I started explaining, invoices are, you do a job for somebody, you've got to send them the invoice, so they've got to send you the money. And as I was talking, I realized that I'm talking absolute garbage. Because he's right. What is an invoice? And why am I now polluting his brain to get him to think that, hold on, when you do work for someone, you need to send an invoice so that they pay you? That's not the way Gen Zers or Gen Zers think, and they shouldn't do, because an invoice is an outdated concept, isn't it? Because you do a job for somebody. I mean, we can call them smart contracts, we can call them whatever, but essentially, you do a job for somebody, they validate that you've done that, you transact the payment, right? That's pretty much it. The concept of three-way matching, and if anyone's from finance here, I can see a load of finance departments being disbanded, but the concept of three-way matching is pretty much obsolete. what is an invoice? And that was just 2 days ago. And I kind of said, yeah, you're right, what is an invoice? So the technology is there, and once technologies come into place, we need to be open to adopt practices to which these technologies can overcome, and not stick to finding ways to shoehorn our previous practices into how technology works. Because I can remember maybe 8 years ago speaking to mainly government procurement departments who were adopting tender platforms, and they were looking for ways to replicate tender opening ceremonies within RFQ platforms. And the question was, why are you doing that? Why are you replicating it? You don't need to do that. Technology gives you the transparency, which is what a tender opening meeting did. So why are you replicating it? So yeah, when technology is there, it's there to solve a business problem. Utilize it.
Thank you very much. And I guess it's about business outcome, now about the technology itself. So I think that brings us also to question number 3, which you already addressed actually, which is the cloud. Doing things in the cloud is also important to remove the complexity of IT and technology, and pushing that into a cloud, letting the experts handle the technology and you focus on the business outcome. So if we look at the cloud, how do you see cloud playing a role in supply chain, digital supply chain programs in general?
Well, I think it's a good point, and I think you touched on the first point around that, around outsourcing the expertise to the experts, right, and not trying to do everything. But also, I think cloud is a big leveler. Okay, so the entry point in terms of costs to the entry point to play, to be part of the supply chain, to be able to respond to requests to tender pricing, real-time collaboration. Cloud removes that barrier in terms of cost. It means that any suppliers from SMEs all the way to the larger organizations can participate. And that's good, because it democratizes supply chain and procurement practice, and makes it and brings more collaborators in there. So I see that's where cloud is having an impact. And remember that one of the main imperatives for organizations for digital transformation was reduction in operational costs. The other one was operational efficiency. The other one was employee productivity. So cloud is, engendering all of these things at the same time.
Thank you, Sam. And I guess another thing also, what I think, when you adopt cloud, if we talk about this partner ecosystem or this digital, collaborative ecosystem, connecting worldwide in a secure way, making sure that you're, making it accessible, that data, to your partner ecosystem. Having it on-prem is going to overcomplicate that, of course. If everyone has an on-prem system and they have to connect to each other, it's going to make onboarding very difficult, and also data visibility and security aspects would be very challenging, I guess.
Yeah, you're putting an unnecessary limitation there. It's an unnecessary limitation. And look, COVID was a big, wake-up call for everybody. 97% of supply chains were disrupted. I don't know where that fact came from, but apparently 97% of supply chains were disrupted. But also, an interesting thing, in a survey that we did, 70% of organizations who had goods supplied late were not aware that it would be supplied late until it was supplied late. Okay, so basically, we all knew there was disruptions, but they hadn't had that information from their suppliers to say, actually, your shipment is going to be 20, 30 days late. Now that's where you don't have the technology to be able to do that. Because if they went to the first line of supplier, the first line of the supply chain, they probably don't have that information. And the second line doesn't, and neither does the third line. So you can only enable this kind of real-time data when you've got connectivity of systems through a common data repository like cloud. You're unable to do that if you've got on-premise systems. So the technology is there, and it's really a case of using it. And if you don't, you'll still be talking about invoices in 5 years' time.
So how do you see organizations embark on this journey? Because there is so much to do. There are so many different initiatives and so many sub-projects that you might be launch. what are the steps that you recommend to start with for a company? Because obviously doing it big bang, I think it's a bit risky.
I think there's you need some champions, but it's interesting because the biggest barrier to digital transformation, certainly in procurement and supply chain, from what I find, is the biggest barrier or perceived barrier is cost. So that's what our research tells us. Our research says that the majority of people will not embark on it because of cost. Conversely, one of the biggest positive outcomes from digital transformation is reduction in cost. Okay, so there's obviously an issue here in, I guess, influencers trying to convince decision makers to embark on digital transformation and to convince them what the value of that digital transformation is, and that it's not about a quick fix, it's about a long-term value add, a long-term operational efficiency, a long-term cost reduction. So that's the biggest barrier that we see by far in our surveys. But I think apart from that, the key thing is, if you are the person who is convinced about digital transformation and you want to sell that within your company, you have to have everyone, or at least the key people, on board, okay? Because these things can't be forced. If you don't have the key people on board, if you don't have a key transformational team, a key project team, and you don't have a very senior stakeholder or champion, then it's not going to happen. And if it does happen, even the perceived benefits are not going to be seen as benefits. So you need to, so before you even go down the steps, you need to clearly articulate why you want a digital transformation. Do you want a digital transformation? What do you want to digitize? What are the outcomes you want? You know, what are the drivers? Do you want to reduce operational cost, efficiency? Do you want to increase transparency, agility, competitiveness? You need to be able to articulate exactly what you want to do that for, and then you need to agree with everyone on what the benefits are. I'm going to, increase operational efficiency or reduce costs by 15% within 3 years. It needs to be clear, otherwise the transformation will fail, regardless of what the outcome is.
Yeah, so I guess you need to prepare yourself from a business point of view, align all the stakeholders, align the expectations, making sure that they're measurable so you can measure success, and then start the journey step by step.
I think, absolutely, because look, the thing is, if you're convinced about, as an individual, you're convinced about the transformational journey, and it makes sense, it's not rocket science, it's a no-brainer, all those terms. You got to realize that not everyone is on the same page. And we hosted an event for our members recently called "What is the Metaverse?" Okay, and I'm sure we all here know what the metaverse is and NFTs and everything else. But anyway, people in that particular event didn't, right? So we had a very good speaker, 21-year-old CEO of a virtual reality company, great speaker, very intelligent young lady, and she was talking to everyone about NFTs and interactions on the V economy in the metaverse. And people in the audience were saying, well, that what you're saying does not make any sense, and it's not going to catch on, I think were some of the words, and who's going to spend 300,000 purchasing a property in the metaverse? And she made a very good point. She said, well, it doesn't really matter, because it's not really, all of this growth is not aimed at you guys, is basically what she was saying. I mean, she's 21, to be fair. And she posed a question. She said, does anybody here know who Travis Scott is? Okay. By the way, does anyone? There you go. Okay, everyone looks at their phone. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Apparently, he is Kim Kardashian's brother-in-law, I think, something like that, whatever. And she made the point. She said, look, Travis Scott the other day had a concert in the metaverse, and he generated $20 million from it. Okay, he would take, and he's very popular apparently. Okay, I don't have any of his CDs, because he doesn't do CDs. It's all virtual. But anyway. She was saying that it would have taken him 3 physical concerts to make the same revenue, okay? So her point was, it doesn't matter whether you know who Travis Scott is. The V economy is live and it's here now. So yes, we know that cloud makes sense and all other technologies, but we have to be careful in articulating that to other people, because they don't realize the benefits now, but it's in our interest to make sure they do, because if another kick up the backside happens like COVID, it's too late to start scrabbling to implement technologies.
Right, thank you. Now we talked about challenges and we talked about, success criteria. In these type of projects, what would you say are the main reasons why a lot of these projects fail? When you talk about large integration projects, for example, where a lot of stakeholders are involved, especially when you talk about the partner ecosystem, what is the main reason that these type of projects fail? And maybe you mentioned it already. Maybe there are other reasons why they fail. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think mainly, as I said before, the main reasons are the articulation up front. That's probably, I think, 73% or something, the reason why the projects like this fail. Because A, you're digitizing because you just want to, because somebody else has SAP or Oracle, or you're digitizing because and you haven't clearly articulated why the business needs to digitize and what elements of the business need to digitize. And 3, you haven't articulated exactly what the benefits you're going to derive are. So then what happens is when the costs come into it, and costs fall into 3 components. Costs are, technical setup costs, ongoing support costs, training costs, and these are hidden to a certain extent. You have to have stakeholders involved at that stage to know that there is going to be a hurdle to digital transformation. So it's people who are not prepared and who try to almost shoehorn it through without having the right stakeholders involved. That's where it really doesn't work, because if it isn't relevant to elements of your business, then it's not going to work. And who needs something that's going to be more, I guess, administrative than before? In procurement and supply, if you want to engage with suppliers and you have more steps to go through by going into a particular system, then that's not going to work. If you have to rewrite your business processes just because you're using a system, then it's not really appropriate to your business. So it's making sure up front you have the requirements in place and the support.
I guess, so it's all about managing the change and aligning the expectations with the business, basically.
Yeah, resistance to change happens with any type of change, as we know, within business and in our own lives. And digital transformation is especially important because it's such a huge changing thinking. You're using systems to do something, but you've got to get away from replicating how a human being did it. And I think there's an example of, I think, Facebook, or Meta, as they're called now, a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, doing an experiment in negotiation where they, I think they kind of trained or powered up 2 robots using AI to negotiate against each other. Right? So you've got these pictures of these robots trying to negotiate against each other, that they look like cyborgs because they're, replicating human beings. And interestingly enough, the experiment, when they actually set it live, the experiment was stopped after about 2 minutes because the robots using artificial intelligence, who were negotiating it against each other, started communicating in a different language. Okay, so initially they're communicating in English or whatever, then they started communicating in whatever code it was, and the people observing couldn't understand what they were doing. Okay, so that's what happens with artificial intelligence, because the AI probably thought, we're negotiating in English, it's just not efficient to do that. Let's use a different way to do it. So obviously the experiment was shut down. But that's what happens when you try and specify something using the human experience. You don't actually need 2 people sitting opposite each other to negotiate. Okay, an e-auction is a negotiation. Okay? You haven't replicated what you do in real life. So it's all about looking at the business outcome and not the process steps and just automating them.
That makes sense. Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for being with us today. And I guess you'll be available for any customer that wants to ask you questions and leverage on your experience. And feel free to approach me or my colleagues as well. Thank you very much for being here today. I think the next speaker is going to be Karim. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. Yes, thanks.